is no surprise to most viewers or even fans of Lord of the Rings that there's a lot of polarized opinions around the Rings of Power show. My guest, Josh Clingman, owner of Resurrection Design Co., definitely believes that The Rings of Power is a very woke production, and as a result, there isn't much good to say about it. Well, I am more of the opinion that there are a few things that I don't like, but I can't say that the whole thing is bad as a result of it. Stay tuned into the rest of this episode to hear more about our opinions, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And with that, let's dive right in. Welcome, my lords, to the White City, where you will learn more about Middle-earth and discover differences and similarities between the Rings of Power show and Tolkien's books, and whether Amazon's show, episode by episode, is worth watching. I'm Philip Dutt, your host, and I'll be joined by Matt Vandervoort and Mark Schaefer. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the White City Podcast. During this intermission between Season 2 and Season 3 of The Rings of Power, you'll find us talking about different characters of Middle-earth and artifacts of Middle-earth, along with the Lord of the Rings trilogy movies and the War of the Rohirrim. If you want to listen to our Season 1 review, then go to the beginning of the podcast at any audio platform. Or if you want to listen to our Season 2 review, go to YouTube or an audio platform and search Season 2 review. There will also be new guests on the show with good amounts of Tolkien and lore expertise. So a lot of things to look forward to. Today I have with me a new guest, Josh Clingman, who was, here's Josh. Yes. About 4 years ago when we kind of connected over petitions that we had started on Lord of the Rings on Prime, which was called at that time, and, which is now The Rings of Power. It was a big influence on why I started this podcast, and yeah, but so for you, Josh, I guess I'll start off with like the question I usually start off with for new guests is, what got you into Lord of the Rings? And, watching the movies, reading the books, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think my personal Lord of the Rings story is a little bit unconventional. Most people, I think, like most people in general, maybe this doesn't apply to kids of my generation. I'm Gen Z, and I guess you're Gen Z as well. But I feel like most people in general.
I would be millennial.
Oh, you're a millennial. Okay. When were you
Yeah.
born?
94.
Oh, really? Okay. I thought it was a little bit later than that. Okay. Interesting. Okay, yeah, that would make you a millennial. Anyway, yeah, so I watched the movies first. I kind of grew up with them, They were like a family staple, I guess you could say, in terms of entertainment. So my older brothers were really into them, and I just I grew up with those movies starting when I was really little. So I actually haven't read The Return of the King. I've read The Fellowship of the Ring. I've read The Two Towers. I've read The Silmarillion. It's a brilliant book. I love it. I love it so much. It's probably my second favorite book, probably. I've read The Hobbit as well, but I wasn't ever able to get quite through all of the Lord of the Rings. So I'm gonna have to get back to that at some point. But yeah, Tolkien is brilliant. I love his works. He's absolutely amazing. So yeah, it's interesting because initially I think my dad wasn't really into Lord of the Rings, and I think it was because he was like a fundamentalist Christian. He was a little bit suspicious of fantasy and the fact that it has wizards and that sort of thing and the magical element. So initially he was pretty skeptical, but there was this theologian guy he knew, a friend of his actually, who he really respected, who actually got our family into the Lord of the Rings. And I think my dad was initially, I think he was initially hesitant to allow that into our household, but he eventually warmed up to it. He passed away in 2015, actually, from cancer. And my understanding is that, like, he wasn't really into it initially, but in his writings, uh, in the years, um, in the years preceding his death, immediately preceding his death, he wrote quite fondly of those stories. Actually, he compared my mom, his wife, to Sam. Actually, like carrying Frodo up the slopes of Mount Doom, because she was always there for him. I have really great parents. They stayed with each other for the entirety of their lives. They never left each other, and I really appreciate that. And they loved each other to the end. So he compared he compared my mom and his wife to Sam carrying Frodo up the slopes of Mount Doom, because that's kind of what it was like in those last few years, because he was dying from cancer, and she was there to be a help to him. So, yeah, anyway, that was kind of tangential. But yeah, that's how I got into the Lord of the Rings. It's kind of a family thing. And The Return of the King to this day is my favorite movie ever. It's phenomenal. It won 11 Academy Awards, actually. All of the Academy Awards it was nominated for, which I think is really phenomenal. And usually I don't really respect the Academy Awards all that much, because it's like a Hollywood liberal establishment kind of thing, and like, well, yeah, I mean, there's that, and then like all these movies that win Academy Awards nowadays, they're not even movies that people watch. So like there's this recent example that I'm trying to think of. I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but one of these movies that won a lot of Academy Awards recently was a movie that made like less than 50 million at the box office, if I'm not mistaken. It was made by the Spanish guy, and it was about this Mexican cartel guy who transitioned from being a man to a woman or something. And just the premise of that is terrible on its face, but aside from that, it's so cringy. Like it's a musical, so it's a musical about a guy becoming a woman, basically, surgically. So it's really disgusting for one thing, but then if you listen to the songs, they're just really cringy, and you're just you. It's amazing that people can show their face in public after performances like that. But yeah, that's a movie that won several Academy Awards recently. So I think the Academy Awards have gone downhill since 2003 significantly. But that's another tangent. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's cool to your the kind of the family ties back there. Wait, so were you saying that was your dad who passed away?
Yeah, it was my dad who passed away. That's right.
Okay, yeah. Sorry about that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sorry to hear. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I know. So like, yeah, just going into also like your petition at least was kind of like the passion, driving that, and what got you started, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so the passion. Let's address the passion first. So obviously, I really, really love Tolkien's world. I love everything that he's written. I mean, I wouldn't say I love the Two Towers and the Fellowship of the Ring or the Return of the King, which I have not read yet, but I'm sure I will in the future. But yeah, these are stories that I grew up with, so I've always held them very dearly to my heart. And when I learned that Amazon had acquired the rights to some of Tolkien's writings to adapt them for television, I guess, when I learned that, I had very, very low expectations. And it's because Amazon is liberal. And for one thing, for another thing, Jeff Bezos had the reason why he had acquired the rights to some of Tolkien's works was because he wanted his own Game of Thrones in his own words, you know, because he saw the success of that particular series and he wanted to replicate that on his own. So that that was not a very good starting point in my mind, because it didn't. Well, actually, I don't know if Jeff Bezos has read the Lord of the Rings or any of those, but it didn't strike me as though he was acquiring the rights to those works out of passion for Tolkien's world or his stories. You know, it sounded like, well, I guess it was just a cash grab. And I mean, Jeff Bezos is a businessman, I guess, so that's fine, I guess. But yeah, anyway, like, he didn't give me much reason to be optimistic about this adaptation that he was going to do. And then, like, another thing was that they decided not to have Peter Jackson direct the series, which I thought was absolutely inexplicable. Instead, they took on writers who didn't have many credits to their name. They had several directors that didn't seem very reputable. There was this one J.A. Bayona guy who had directed Jurassic World or something. So that was something. But yeah, so it didn't seem like the talent was there or the passion on the part of the production team. So that was a little bit worrying. But the catalyst for starting this petition against the Rings of Power was a headline that said that, and I don't remember if it was a rumor, but it said that Amazon Studios had hired an intimacy coordinator for the series, which implied that they were at least considering adding sex scenes to this adaptation of Tolkien's world that they were producing. So that, at a very fundamental level, that just kind of grated on my Christian sensibilities, because for one thing, like, I don't think Tolkien would have approved of adding such earthy stuff to his world. Like, he never wrote that into his own stories. And then for another thing, like, it was just obscene. They wanted to add obscenity into that series and thereby desecrate Tolkien's good name. So as a somewhat dedicated fan, I couldn't have it. So I was kind of angry and I wanted to do something about it, so I started a petition. I looked around. I looked around before I'd started the petition, and I don't think I saw any, but I might not have looked very long. But somehow the two of us found each other, because we'd both written petitions on the same subject. So yeah, that was kind of cool how that turned out. So yeah, so I wrote the petition and I got quite a few more signatures than I had initially anticipated. I think I marketed the petition mainly on Twitter, actually. I think I had several Twitter accounts that I switched between, and I would use hashtags and like link to the petition. And I actually tagged a lot of like high profile Twitter people who are like into Tolkien, like maybe the Tolkien Society, at J.R.R. Tolkien. I think he's a guy who's like really into Tolkien and the concept of eucatastrophe, which is a word that Tolkien coined, which means good catastrophe. It's also my favorite word, by the way. I think it's really cool. But yeah, so I was really happy with the amount of support that I received, and then I found you through all of the outreach. I think you were the one who found me, actually. But yeah, that was fun. And then we found out that there was this other guy named Catholic Memes or something. So I guess he must have been a Catholic of some stripe. But he'd also started a petition, and it had actually garnered even more signatures than either your petition or mine. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, I think a lot of fans were just incensed by the idea that Amazon intended to absolutely desecrate Tolkien's works. And they ended up not adding the sex scenes into Rings of Power, for which I'm thankful. But they still managed to ruin it by sticking a lot of woke stuff in there anyway. So yeah, it
How
wasn't
would
a
you say the how would you say woke stuff was added into the show?
yeah, that's a good question. So for one thing, they made Galadriel the embodiment of femininity in Tolkien's world. They made her into a boss girl feminist woman who could beat up people, and take down a cave troll in 7 seconds. So that was one way that they added wokeness into it. And then they had to have a lot of DEI hires. That's simply evident if you look at look at the people who were hired for roles, like actors and actresses, and probably a lot of backstage people as well, like producers and writers. Wouldn't surprise me if they were DEI hires, because it doesn't seem like they were hired based on their talent. I mean, if you watch The Rings of Power and if you listen to the stuff that the characters are saying to each other, you can observe the caliber of writing talent that 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 these writers produced, and it's not very high in my opinion. So yeah, so that's one thing. Like, they decided to add like lots of Asian characters and black characters in there. They introduced a black elf into the thing, and we got a black dwarf as well. There was this oh, I don't even remember her name, but she's the wife of Durin or something, and she's also a strong boss lady as well. She's also really morbidly obese, so do the they wanted to represent the fat community as well. So yeah. Anyway, lots of weird stuff, and then also the liberal wokeness is also observable in the worldview of the show, and one of the ways this is manifested is in that scene where they depict an orc family, basically implying that orcs are just misunderstood, and they're like deep down they're really really good at their core, but they're just misunderstood, and they happen to maybe be on the wrong side of history, and they're like an oppressed class or something. So yeah, so that was really dumb. So yeah, those are just some examples.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so you thought that it was pretty apparent with like things like Disa's being like strong-minded at all made her to be kind of like this feminist woman who like was, for instance, like being kind of, I don't know,
She's
not
always
necessarily
taking
control, maybe not necessarily always controlling, but that's kind of like way you like what you kind of like picked up from that.
Yeah, I did pick up on that. I think a lot of people picked up on that actually. Yeah, I mean,
Because I
like
did not.
Disa. Oh, you did not? Okay, that's interesting.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess I guess whatever you can say about them, about Galadriel and Disa, you can't say that they're traditional feminine characters. And I don't appreciate that, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate that. Like Galadriel, she was just obnoxious. She was very strong-willed, stubborn. Yeah, and Disa was kind of the same. So yeah, just not my cup of tea, I guess. I think I think if you want an attractive feminine character, you should go for traditional femininity. But yeah, I guess that might just be my opinion, but I also think it's objectively true.
Okay, interesting because I agree with your opinion on that, and I think that like Tolkien's, like, it's very conservative and all, right? but I guess I don't see how like Disa's portrayal was like just was I guess just like feministic. Like okay, like is I guess is the idea you're saying is that was that like Disa was in charge and like Durin was just like fooling her around, that kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe so. Like I guess I don't have very many specific examples in mind, but it just seemed like she was very strong-willed. She had a mind of her own, which is fine, I guess. I guess women are entitled to have a strong mind and maybe be a little bit strong-willed. But yeah, sometimes it seemed like Durin, in comparison to her, was just a wuss, and she was kind of naggy, and yeah, maybe she was kind of in control and having having him tag along. But but yeah, I guess I don't have very many specific examples in mind because it's been a while since I've watched the series, but that's just the impression that she gave me, and just like all the female characters in the series gave me. But yeah, I don't know.
Do you feel that do you feel that there's some like yeah, because I could be getting this wrong, but like it's something that I thought about people who take the show extremely negatively
Hmm.
is that they they found like some things they didn't like about it, and then that poured into everything else. Because for me, I was looking for something that was woke. I went into it and I was like, oh well, it's not there's not gonna be sex nudity. Like that was kind of like thrown out the window. Everybody's saying that, and then going into the show, like for season one, I'm very much like looking for this, and like maybe I don't really see like feminine like like feminist stuff necessarily as being maybe like extremely woke, and like that wasn't I guess maybe the kind of woke that I was looking for per se,
Well,
but
what were you looking for then?
I was looking for anything that would be like LGBTQ, making like there be something like twisting things like that. That
Yeah.
was like that was what I was looking for, and I guess like I could definitely see how like Galadriel, especially in season one, was very much like yeah, very kind of bold, and in a sense like I think that I don't know if they intended for this, but seemed to be kind of arrogant, and I think that they kind of switched that around when they got to season two.
Yeah, I think you are right.
But so I think they might. I don't know if they kind of rep that, but they definitely kind of changed that character kind of trait about her. But I can see how that is. I guess. I guess like I don't know, I just like this. Even though like my brother would say like, oh yeah, Disa and Durin, and like Disa's just like the boss girl all the time, and like making him like do all this stuff, and or like she's the one in charge, kind of a thing,
Yeah.
and it was just kind of it just for me. I was just like I never picked up on that. Um,
Yeah.
it always seemed to me that Durin was out, just you know doing things with his dad. He was taking part in a lot of the decisions that were made. Disa was there giving him advice, but was never actually like out like doing things for him or making like these statements for him. I mean, the biggest thing you could see maybe was like her going to the king or like whatever in like season two, and she's like talking about how like she needs to like sing to Casa Doom to open up the windows for the light. So I mean, I guess that could have been her like necessarily being more bold, but like yeah, I don't. I mean, I guess maybe it could be people saying like, oh, she's telling like Durin that she needs to go back and be brave to like his dad, maybe that would be something that people are like trying to pull from, but yeah, I don't know. I guess like to me like to me I thought like wow, if they're really trying to wokeify this, they're doing a poor job. You can hear a lot about like behind the scenes stuff that I thought like yeah, they're doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes like at the Comic-Con, like before the season 2 came out. There were like fans there, very much woke fans who are like, will we be represented, you know, as LGBTQ people in the show? And
Yeah.
they said, well, maybe you already are. But it just like to me, it was never like this apparent. I'm like, okay, that's like the direction they're taking with things, maybe, and that more of it was like, okay, maybe they're not like setting up Galadriel well in the beginning to like it's like she's trying too hard to be angry, and like it just for me like especially first off it seemed like okay, like doesn't seem very compelling as a
Yeah. It's
character,
off-putting.
but yeah, so like this is kind of like the way I felt about it. And I guess like sometimes it it feels that when people are frustrated about something, they're like, oh, they're frustrated about this and this, and then like it's like I'll bring to somebody like, hey, like what about Elendil and Muriel? Like, I feel like their relationship was decent, like from like at least even just like from like a stance of like of Tolkien, like kind of Tolkien-esque characters, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting that they took the stance of like no, like the queen's actually like he said like simping or like making the guy look like a fool and like leading. And it was just one of those things where it's like to me it felt like okay, well, you're trying too hard to like to to like hey, you can't be positive about this show. I don't know. That's just kind of what it felt from like just hearing people who are negative, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that kind of makes sense. Yeah, when I say wokeness, I'm talking about the LGBT stuff. I'm talking about the DEI stuff. The fact that they put black and Asian characters in there. I mean, I'm half Asian myself. The reason I have a problem with that is because it's kind of, well, I mean, it's kind of dumb. Like, why? I don't really understand that. Like, I don't think anybody asked for that. But it's like an evidence of liberal thought on the part of the people making the show, Because the liberals are always the people who want to put DEI in things, They want everyone to be represented. They want to be inclusive in all this mumbo jumbo that most people don't really care about. What people care about is a good story told compellingly. And you can't make a story compelling just by inserting crappy writing that feels like it was written by ChatGPT, and then and then like maybe virtue signaling by inserting some black characters here and some obese characters there, Like that's just not a working strategy, and that's how I felt. That's how I felt they did the thing. Yeah, so I guess I would include a lot of things in the definition of woke. And so maybe my definition is a little bit broader than yours, but I would include feminism. I would include DEI hires. I would include the LGBT stuff. I would include the whole mindset that people at their core are innately good and not evil, like the Bible teaches. I would include all of that as woke, fundamentally.
Unfortunately, at this point in the podcast, I accidentally unplugged my microphone, so I'm going to re-record all the spots that, I would have recorded in and fill those gaps between when Josh is recording. But just to kind of give a summary of some things here up to now, and then I'll just kind of say what I kind of would have said here over these last couple of minutes. But so I think I already said that I agree with Josh's definition of woke, and I also think that generally speaking, as a Christian as well, I would say that woke is a is in a sense pitted against Christians in a lot of ways. I'm not just saying this to bash it, and I mean in a sense, I mean I disagree with it all entirely, but again, something like being liberal is, just because you're liberal, that doesn't make you like a bad person. In a sense, and Josh too is saying like how you're talking about, in nature, are we good or evil? And I think that's something that Tolkien would definitely say, like, hey, by nature, we are evil, but he shows that in having a clear distinction between people who are good and people who are evil. And whether the orcs having families, I mean, in I don't know that necessarily is just making them entirely evil, more or less. I mean, what am I saying? I'm saying I don't know that the orcs having families like is like the problem necessarily. I think that the problem is that they're trying to make orcs seem likable or like relatable. I think that was the problem, and that to me was a big issue in the lore. If you go back to, I can't remember which episode it was I reviewed on, but I did talk about how that was one of my bigger issues about things, is that they tried to make the orcs relatable, and as a result, when you went into season 8, or episode 8 rather, you got orcs who were kind of flip-floppy, or you don't really see like real evil coming out of Region. Even Adar is hard to say that he was really evil. So I get that. And I think that to me is more of a, well, it is kind of a something to be said for Christianity in a sense of innately good or innately evil. I don't know that just, yeah, it's just hard to, it's hard to just necessarily say because they have kids and have family that the orcs are being shown as being, how would you say, like a wishy-washy kind of good evil kind of thing. Because the other thing, okay, not to ramble, but the other thing is that at the end of episode 8, Sauron does change that, right? He kills that one orc who's acting like, he's all like heartfelt, and he's trying to make sure that, the orcs are understood and whatnot, and then Sauron's just like, kill you. So Amazon doesn't continue with the idea that orcs are redeemable, I guess, in a sense, and I guess that's the thing, is that are orcs redeemable. So yeah, anyway, so that wasn't so the whole like good and evil side of things to like what makes something woke wasn't necessarily something that stood out to me just through the orcs. It was more of a, they're trying to make us relate to them, and I guess in a sense make them less evil. So anyways, maybe that point is mute, but I guess I just in general, just to say like what makes something woke, and then under that, I guess, what determines like why I would call something woke. So I think the biggest thing for me here is the DEI hiring is something that I have, like, I would not be able to tell you whether or not somebody was hired as a, through DEI, because in order for that to happen, I would have to know that this person was hired because of their sex or their gender, or, I mean, if you want to say weight, right, instead of somebody else, just because, right? And then that other person maybe who they decided to not go with would have been a better candidate on skills and, just, yeah, maybe better at the job in general, then that would make sense. Okay, yes, that would make sense to me as being a DEI hire. But just because Amazon is liberal and maybe they have a woke agenda about things doesn't mean that the apple, for instance, that you get from a tree is rotten doesn't make every single apple on that tree rotten. So yeah, so DEI hires, I'd have to see behind the scenes. Already talked about good and evil. The feminist side of things, I think that again, I'm I'm not one to really be able to say like, all right, Galadriel, yeah, maybe, but then they change Galadriel's character, like Disa, like sorry that like that never crossed my mind that she might be wearing the pants in the relationship. So, and then you look at Arondir, as I think I actually said that in this little short clip, is that Arondir is actually like a decent character for for the show. Like, even though he's black and he's an elf and he's like not even an elf that should be in the lore, right? But he's still hired for that spot, and I think he fills it pretty well as an elf character. I think people probably don't like him because his story doesn't make sense. Like he's not connected hardly in any way, like except through Adar in episode 8. So those are just like some things. I can't just say because maybe like because like Amazon's woke and all, and like then they're putting that into their show, and then I can see all this stuff, and therefore it's bad. Like somebody could be a bad actor because they're a bad actor. It doesn't mean that they're woke. Somebody could be black, and that doesn't mean that they're hired as DEI.
Well, I mean, at some level, I couldn't care less myself if it were a compelling story, which it isn't. But what grinds on me more is the reason why they put black characters in there. I mean, I don't hate black people. I think black people are fine. I think Asians are fine. I'm half Asian, like I said. But yeah, I guess, and maybe, you know, I'm glad that you're not that upset by those things. They kind of stick out at me, and they contribute to ruining the show for me. Like I think it was terrible storytelling. I think the writing was terrible. I think the acting was meh for the most part. But like adding all of those fundamental storytelling errors along with all the woke stuff just kind of it's not a winning combination, I guess you could say. So, yeah, it sounds like I might pay attention more to those things. Like it's not I'm trying to think of how to say this. Like, yeah, I guess for the DEI hires, specifically for all the DEI actors, yeah, the reason why I'm personally upset by that is because of the reason why they put those in there. It's indicative of the worldview of the people who are making the show, you know? And it's not a worldview that I personally agree with. And I just think it's annoying that they're shoehorning that in there when there's no place for that, given that Tolkien's world, well, specifically the regions that are dealt with in the series, don't, I mean, they shouldn't involve any black or diverse characters, you know? So, yeah.
Basically, I mentioned that Arondir is done pretty well in the show. I think the actor plays him well, even though he is black, and he acts like a Tolkien elf. In my opinion, there's not really a whole lot you can say wrong about him. His his storyline is pretty, you say, restricted though.
I actually agree with that. I do like Arondir or Arondir. And actually he might have been my favorite character because he was like a strong, masculine individual. I mean, he was decent, he was likable, he was stoic. Yeah, I actually appreciated his character, and that might be funny to hear. But so yeah, I guess I don't mind him. I don't mind him all that much. So we have some common ground there. That's wonderful.
I'm not sure exactly the question I asked at this point, but I think I asked Josh something like, "Is there any issues with the lore that you had?" Because most of this is, worldview that he's been talking about up to now.
I mean, unfortunately, the lore is something that I'm less familiar with, having never read the appendices in The Return of the King. I mean to get to that eventually, but having read other works of Tolkien, I can just tell that this whole series is not in line with the spirit of Tolkien's works. At least that's my opinion, I think. So yeah, that's my 2 cents, I guess.
Josh has been probably the most opinionated guest on my podcast. And not just opinionated, but he doesn't like it. And I mean, there are people who I've recorded with who don't like certain things about the show, but he's been the most, I guess, just yeah, opinionated on that end of things.
But that's really funny that what you say about me being the most opinionated. I thought everyone hated the show. Actually, I was gonna ask how would you rate the show on a scale of 1 to 10?
It's interesting because usually whenever I've said anything about a rating on the show, it's typically been kind of a letter grade. So I've given it a B. I don't know, B or B minus maybe, I guess. And then whenever Josh asked me about, on a scale of 1 to 10, what I would rate the show as, I gave it a 7.5. Just because that sounded better, like sounded more accurate than an 8. So I'm not sure exactly, you know, some between a 7.5 and an 8. You know, B minus, maybe a B. Yeah.
A B. Interesting. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, for me, the Hobbit movies were a B. I think the first one might have been a B plus. I liked the first movie. But yeah, I think the Rings of Power I'd have to rate 2 out of 10. I didn't like it at all. So I'm glad you were able to enjoy it a little bit more than I was. But yeah, I mean, there's all the woke stuff. There was the terrible writing, in my opinion. I thought it was really terrible writing. Like the only good lines in almost the entirety of the series were lines that were written by Tolkien himself, and that the writers just extracted, which is fine, But those were the only good lines. Like, you would expect that a multi-billion-dollar series would actually have some talent attached to it, but yeah, like it was a lot of the writing was just like loaded with cliches or meaningless phrases that sounded like they should mean something, like they were meant to convey the idea of meaning something without actually meaning something, if that makes any sense.
So you've made a big deal of Tolkien's faith and worldview being against what you believe Amazon's doing by making the Rings of Power woke. So it'd be interesting to see, with your answer to this question, to what would you attribute the success of Tolkien's works?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so for one thing, like Tolkien was a real master of his craft. The world of Middle Earth and Arda, that was something that he'd worked on since maybe his 20s, I guess. I need to read his biography again, but it was like really early. It was a multi-decade process. So he really poured his heart and soul into these things, into these stories, into this mythos that he was creating. So that's one reason he was really, really, really good at his craft. The other reason I would attribute the success of his stories to is the fact that it's built on the foundation of Christianity. Tolkien is famous for saying that The Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally Catholic and Christian work. He said that in a letter to some fan. But yeah, and that's evident, I think, to any informed person who reads his works. If you read the Silmarillion, it's very evident that major plot points in his mythology follow plot points in the Bible. You've got creation by a single god. You have the fall of the angels. You have the fall of Lucifer. Melkor is basically Lucifer. You have the fall of, well, I can't honestly say humanity, but it's basically the fall of humanity. Kind of, it's the Middle Earth parallel to that with the kinslaying. So yeah, just lots of there are a lot of major plot points that his mythology shares with the Bible, and they're clearly inspired by the Bible, and I think that's really cool. So yeah, but yeah, like his Christian worldview is interwoven throughout his stories, and I think at a very fundamental level, those stories resonate with people in a Christian world. Like, you don't necessarily have to be Christian to like these stories, obviously, because they're fundamentally good stories, at a very fundamental level. I keep on using that word. But like, I think specifically people who have grown up in Western civilization, people who have had their imaginations shaped by the story of Christianity, I think the Lord of the Rings resonates with them in a peculiar way because of the culture in which they were raised and because of the culture out of which Tolkien's works were born out of. So yeah, those are the reasons I would mention. Tolkien was really good at his craft and Christianity, basically. Oh, there's one more thing that I would like to share, and I actually have to leave in about 8 minutes, so we might need a. This might be a good closing thing. But my favorite word is actually coined by J.R.R. Tolkien. He coined the word eucatastrophe. I mentioned it earlier, but it means good catastrophe, and that's the word that he applied to. Let's see. That's the word that he applied to the ending of The Lord of the Rings. It's basically a plot in which, things are going really, really badly, and then there's a sudden turning, a sudden shift in the direction of good. A good catastrophe, if you would like to put it that way. He's called the incarnation of Christ a catastrophe. I think he called it the greatest catastrophe, or eucatastrophe, in human history, because it was the sudden turning of human history, I guess, in a sense, because God came down, he became man, and things started looking up for us, I guess, because, Christianity was born, and suddenly the salvation of the world was nigh. But also, the resurrection is a catastrophe, or a eucatastrophe. My goodness, I need to not be blasphemous here. But yeah, I usually see the resurrection and eucatastrophe as synonymous concepts, because with resurrection, it's the idea of life coming out of death, and with eucatastrophe, it's the idea of really, really things going really, really badly, and then there being a sudden turning towards a good and happy ending. So in a sense, the resurrection was a good catastrophe, I think you could say. So yeah, I guess that's all I've got. But thank you for having me on, Philip. I really appreciate this. It's been a good, stimulating conversation. Um, I've got to admit, I thought we were on the same boat in insofar as the Rings of Power was concerned. I thought we both hated the show, but so that's kind of funny to me. Well, I'm glad you were able to enjoy it more than I was. Yeah, someone's got to, I think. I mean, Amazon spent billions of dollars on that, so someone had better enjoy that, because otherwise all of that money was wasted.
Thanks, Josh, for coming on and giving your 2 cents on things. Really appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and catch us for our next podcast episode coming out next week. Thanks for visiting the White City. Before you leave, please subscribe to our podcast and check us out at thewhitecitypodcast.com. We're on YouTube or Facebook under the tag @The White City Podcast.